It is once again that time of year again where we are out with the old and in with the new. The time of Black Ops 4 has come to an end, and one thing that we have done this year more than any other year before is dive into the story of the game. And I think the reason that we've done that is because this was the first Call of Duty game that simply did not have a campaign. However, that wasn't for a lack of trying, because as it turns out, in the game there was something called the Specialist Headquarters that was filled with cutscenes that you could piece together to find out the overarching story of Black Ops 4. And on my channel, we have over 5 hours of videos dedicated to this subject, deciphering the code of Black Ops 4. And what I do today is piece it all together in a video that takes under 20 minutes to watch that is the entire story of Black Ops 4. So if you're into that kind of thing, sit back, relax, and enjoy. And I don't normally do this, but if you could please hit the like button on this video. It took forever for me to put this together, so if you enjoy, all I ask is please hit that like button. But without further ado, enjoy the video. The story of Black Ops 4 begins in a cemetery. A cemetery with 2 different people walking through, the older of which is named Savannah, and the younger of which, her niece, is named Lucy. And as it turns out, they are going to see Jessica Mason Green's grave. Now, as it turns out, Jessica Mason is actually the granddaughter to Alex Mason from Black Ops 2. But as we find out, Savannah is her sister and Lucy is her daughter. Now, this brings us to a flashback where Jessica Mason is alongside Battery and Ruin going on a mission. Now, the one thing that we don't actually know here, but it's said by subtext in other cutscenes, is Savannah is actually the one in charge of this mission. Savannah is the one that sent Jessica, Battery, and Ruin on this mission. And all of a sudden, things start going a little bit poorly. Jessica Mason ends up getting shot in the face and left for dead in this cabin in the middle of the woods, and then Battery gets her arm shot off and dragged off by Ruin. Now, in the middle of the cutscene, Ruin realizes that, well, someone tipped off the bad guys that they were coming, and after this, Savannah wants to figure out exactly what happened. So, she puts together a dream team of specialist characters, and each of these specialist characters has their own backstory. And we're going to go through each of these backstories, starting off with the big man himself, Ruin.
What do you have in mind?
Now, if I'm being quite honest, Ruin probably has one of the most boring stories out of any of the characters. He joined the military straight out of high school, isn't a big fan of covert ops, so is just simply an infantry soldier. But he strongly believes in the theory of no man left behind.
Cut up. Squad mate's dead. Back, over.
Sir, eyes up. We have our orders, Walsh. We push through this hellhole and rendezvous with command.
All due respect, if that were you, you'd want us to divert, right? Never leave a man behind.
Stand down, Private. There'll be consequences.
Fuck your consequences.
Now, throughout his time in the army, Ruin actually worked with a lot of different soldiers, but one of which that we get to see in his comic was none other than Jessica Mason. And yes, that redhead is Jessica Mason. And as you can see by the name tags there, it's Jessica Mason and Donnie Walsh, aka Ruin. Jessica Mason actually ended up being the officer in charge of Ruin during the comic. And it's not directly said, but it's hinted at that their relationship might go a little bit deeper than just being friends. But like I said in the cutscene, Ruin ends up saving Battery, and they're pretty much the best of friends. But this brings us to Battery's cutscene, one that's a little bit darker. So Aaron Baker, aka Battery, falls into another family with over 100 years of military service. And the last we saw of her was in that previous cutscene where she was getting her arms cut off. And her next cutscene once again begins in the exact same area, where it actually turns out that she is having a nightmare where once again she is losing her arms. But as we find out, she actually wakes up from this nightmare in a hospital bed in Savannah Mason's care, with her doctor being none other than Crash.
We'll fix her. We fix everything. Even you.
So what exactly does Savannah mean by "we fix everything, even you"? Well, to understand that, we have to go to Crash's cutscene, where it begins in the back of a casino in a poker room. And in this cutscene, Crash, aka Jera Baisley, is actually playing poker, and as we find out, he owes money to a lot of the wrong people, as he has a bit of a gambling addiction. And in this cutscene, he ends up losing poker to some of these mobsters, but luckily for him, one of them ends up getting shot, and he ends up being able to use his medical skills to remove the bullet from him. As it turns out, Crash is actually not a doctor, he's a veterinarian, but his medical skills go a bit beyond puppies and kitties to mobsters. So eventually, Savannah ends up recruiting him into her group of specialist characters. But as we talked about in Crash's video, it goes a little bit further than this, because based off of the Black Ops storyline, one character actually ends up shooting up a casino. That character is none other than Reaper. And to actually find this out, we actually have to go back to Black Ops 3 and find out a little bit about Reaper through his audio recordings. As it turns out, he originally wasn't a sentient robot. He was actually taken over by a casino and programmed to go out and kill people so people could bet on him. And when Prophet gets his hands on him, he actually changes his software, makes him a sentient robot. Reaper chooses the name Reaper and goes and shoots up the casino.
Wasn't expecting what I found. The people who had stolen and modified Reaper were running an underground gambling ring for rich high rollers. The sums of money changing hands electronically over his body count were astronomical. Enough to equip a private army. How's that make you feel?
Kill, maim, destroy.
Figured as much. Reckon we should see what we can do about that. So, you should probably explain what happened after you arrived at the server location.
Compliance. Commencing audio playback.
It's here! The EWR is here!
There is no EWR. Only Reaper.
Shut it down! Shut it down! It's not responding! It's not responding to commands!
Metabolize element 82. Inefficient meat bags. Optimal fire solution achieved.
So why was Prophet able to change EWR 115 or Reaper? Well, it actually goes back a little bit further than this, and you have to understand Prophet's story. So first of all, Prophet's story actually begins in his comic where his parents actually died of a degenerative disease in his arms. And after them slowly dying, Prophet comes to the decision that basically meat is weak, and he wants to be as far from a human as he can possibly be. So he gets as many different prosthetics and changes to his body, including his eyes, parts of his brain, and limbs as possible, relating to a robot almost more than he could relate to a human. Now, this makes it so that he can relate more easily to Reaper, and in the comic we once again see this happening. But then once again in Prophet's cutscene, we see that this also made him essentially a super soldier, a soldier that never missed a bullet with a gun, and basically could do anything a robot can with the brain of a human. This is why Savannah then goes ahead and recruits Prophet. And we find out that Savannah goes to some pretty extreme circumstances to actually recruit these people. When recruiting the Japanese soldier Recon, she actually went to an extreme extent where she told him that he had to shoot a child to complete the mission, to make sure that everyone is actually going to be safe. Now, they did end up putting blanks in the weapon so that Recon didn't shoot the child, but she did so to make sure that Recon would follow orders to a T. And eventually, because he did, he ended up joining the team.
It was a test, Kimura, and you just passed. Dismantle and stow the rifle. There's a woman you need to meet.
But not all the soldiers went through the same type of testing. Savannah went out of her way to make sure she recruited characters that knew, well, at least their difference between right and wrong. Torque, the engineer, was actually brought on board after putting laxative into one of his corporal's cups of coffee. Now, he did this because the corporal was being a jerk to a bunch of the other soldiers, even going as far as giving them hypothermia. After Savannah heard about him doing this, she recruited them to the specialist program.
I've got a proposition for you that I think will be mutually beneficial.
Another character with the same type of morals is Kirk Rousseau, aka Ajax. Now, Ajax's story begins with him actually a leader of a gang in Johannesburg, South Africa. Now, the thing with Kirk Rousseau is his morals were actually bigger than his gang. He was fighting against police officers which were abusing their power, but when it came to actually killing one, he couldn't do so, and Van Gran, another member of the gang, actually ends up taking over. When Savannah sees this, she ends up recruiting him because, once again, of his morals. The next character from South America is Nomad, and he is an elite jungle warrior, essentially, and when he finds out that some of his teammates have gone rogue and are chasing him through the jungle, he takes matters into his own hand, using his traps and his puppy Juno to his advantage. And these are just a few of the things and reasons why he ends up a part of Savannah's team. Now, some of the specialist characters have a little bit of a darker and seeded backstory, one of which is Firebreak. His cutscene begins with him burning some dead bodies, which he was hired to do to exterminate a disease, which we'll talk about in a minute. However, we find out with his backstory that as a kid, he was actually in an abusive family where his father abused both him and his little sister. He took circumstances into his own hands where he decided to light his father on fire, killing him and ridding him of his sister of that abusive family. Now, Firebreak's background is Czech, but as we find out in the ending cutscene, he's actually burning these bodies in Singapore, a country that has been pretty much abolished by a disease, and by burning the bodies, he's trying to get rid of that disease. Now, he's not the only characters whose story takes place in Singapore. If we go over to Seraph, she is actually born and raised in Singapore and is part of the 54I, or the 54 Immortals. And her cutscene is basically showing her rising to the top level of the 54I, aka an enforcer, wherein which she has to remove her arm so that she is able to use the Annihilator pistol, which if she didn't have a robot arm, would have so much kick that it would literally break her forearm. And then there were the characters that came later, one of them being Zero, a computer hacker that Savannah hired to be able to take care of individual characters' direct neural interfaces and take care of some of the behind-the-scenes work we're going to talk about in a minute. And then Outrider, a character who grew up on the streets of Rio de Janeiro and is basically as sneaky as they come. So Savannah puts together this group of super soldiers, and she makes it seem as though the reason she's doing it is to get to the bottom of her sister's death. However, as we come to find out in the very next scene, there's a lot more to Savannah.
Welcome to the immersion. Your instructor has been activated. His methods are unconventional and often nuanced. But if you want to fight in the
Mason! Better be goddamn good. You woke me up.
And when you first see this cutscene, it makes you think as though they are in some sort of simulation like Black Ops 3. But as it turns out, at the very end of the story, you find out that Frank Woods and Alex Mason are alive and, well, kind of well. They're not actually the same people that were in the original games, but something new called archetypes. This is something that Savannah came up with known as Project Blackout, where she brings back old soldiers from old times and has them fight to see who can be the best super soldier, aka Blackout that we know is the Battle Royale. But it doesn't just end there. It gets, in fact, much, much weirder as we find out that not only did Savannah bring Frank Woods back to life, they're actually bumping uglies. No, I'm not kidding. Savannah is boning her grandfather's best friend.
fair chance.
That's why I love you, sweetheart. You make no fucking sense whatsoever.
But it doesn't just end there, because it turns out Savannah is not just bringing back good guys to life, she also brought back Raul Menendez to fund her operation by running the black market. We find this out through various different Easter eggs through multiplayer maps. Because it gets even crazier, because as it turns out, remember that setup at the very beginning where Jessica Mason got shot in the face? That was a doing from none other than Raul Menendez. The reasoning for it is he knew that Jessica was against Project Blackout and he needed to get Savannah's sister out of his way.
The cancer is spreading. Our archetypes are the cure. You, me, Woods, Mason. All of us. This is a matter of national security. I have sworn to guarantee the success of this project. You cannot walk back what you just told me.
You better back the fuck off.
It is out of your hands now. I will take care of it.
I will fix this.
It's too late. Remember, you came to us.
Look, you can't do this. All right, she's my sister.
Was your sister.
Just try it.
And as it turns out, he does try it and successfully shoots Jessica Mason in the face. But as all of the new specialist characters are getting trained under Savannah's tutelage, it turns out that they are getting tipped off by a mystery man telling them the true story of what Savannah is actually doing. And by the end of the story, this is what ends up happening.
No one gives a fuck about you. You're a number. An asset. A pawn in someone else's game.
The fuck? How are you?
There's no time. They're here.
Your exits are compromised. Find another way out.
What the fuck is going on?
I'm sending you a safe house address. Make sure you aren't followed.
The specialists are Doc. Are they still alive? Who wants us dead?
They've been manipulating you, watching you, exploiting you. And when they get what they want, they'll leave you for dead.
Lucy, this is Donnie.
Jessica? You... How?
Alone, you can put up a fight. But together, you can start a war.
So as it turns out, Jessica has been alive the whole time, recruiting the specialists onto her side to fight against Savannah and her project, Project Blackout, and did a pretty damn successful job at that. Now, the one specialist character we haven't talked about so far is, of course, Spectre. Throughout this year, we've had many arguments talking about whether or not Jessica Mason is actually Spectre, and I've left out one detail and one detail alone from these arguments because it's more of a question than an answer. And what it comes down to is once Spectre was brought into Black Ops 4 during Operation Spectre Rising, the first time we were introduced to Spectre, Spectre was blowing up the dam, trying to destroy the Blackout map. Who would have more of a reason or a motive to do so other than Jessica Mason? Just one more reason why I truly believe Spectre is Jessica. But hey, that's just my opinion. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the Black Ops 4 story. Of course, I left out a lot of details, especially with individual specialist characters. If you want to dive deeper into any of the specialist characters, you can check out the playlist, which will be linked down below, or you can just check out any of the individual characters' videos as well. But I hope you enjoyed this video. It took a lot of effort to put together, so if you enjoy this kind of thing, please hit that like button. And of course, we're going to do a similar thing with Modern Warfare once that comes out. So if you're at all interested, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, make sure you have notifications on, and let me know what you thought of the video down in the comments below. But guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace out.
We are